One of the many justifications for the West's involvement in the affairs of other non-Western nations has been the advocacy for freedom and democracy. More detailed analyses would reveal further exaggerated iterations of such justifications, such as the liberation from autocratic rule, or because such a nation might pose an existential threat to Western freedom itself and the continuity of the Western way of life, as in what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. And as we go back in history, many more examples of such Western involvement can be presented. And that's why the Western ruling class believes it's the beacon of human civilization and advancement. And such advancement would result in the implementation of fair and structured governance, freedom of choice and speech, liberty, human rights, and justice for all developing nations. Now, all these elements aren't necessarily Western-born. Neither do they belong exclusively to that part of the world. These are universal attributes that belong to the human condition, and various civilizations and nations have achieved them at points in time relative to their own and specific dynamics. And that is the key phrase, relative to their own and specific dynamics as a people. Every people has progressed differently along history, and the progress I mean is not about the political, economic, or technological. No, the progress I mean is much more complicated. It has to do with behavior elements that are much more fundamental than even a society's education or will for reform. Such variances of development have to do with social behavior, responsibilities, and expectations that are virtually innate within their character. And the Arabs have now been the main target of this Western involvement for almost a full century. Involvement in the removal of regimes, promises of freedom and equality, and in all-out wars that have come to characterize this region. But when will they learn? When it comes to nation building and the practice of the appropriate system of governance, that all good things will come to those who wait. Democracy is and has always been a Western ideal. It is projected as the sole method and end goal for the rule of the people by the people for over 2 centuries now. And the most representative of these democracies, nations like the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, are all nations that have driven the world to moments of madness during the 20th and 21st centuries. World Wars I and II, the colonialization of the Middle East after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and the War on Terror. Democracy, though, also does have its appeal. It allows for the foundations of basic rights, certain freedoms, and relative justice, and a level of accountability that is not present in the Arab world today. Please note that I've qualified all these attributes because, in fact, no one democracy in the world professes absolutes of any of these features, be it freedoms or basic rights, of, let's say, security and safety. Not even the most developed of nations, as mentioned previously, guarantee these for their populations. So it's with this lens that Arabs look upon democracy, a Western ideal that is foreign to them, an ideal that is the cause of many of their own geopolitical sufferings over the last century. And finally, an ideal that is both a success and a failure, and hence not truly an ideal, but obviously more or less a hypocrisy. And that's why on a high level and across the general masses of populations, the goal of Western democracy is both naturally resisted and rejected. Now, it's easy to look at things from a high level and generalize, but there are indeed underlying factors that complicate Arab acceptance of democracy. And all these factors have to do with the gradual progression and passage of time. One element we have to keep in mind is that none of the Western nations had a sudden moment of clarity that shifted their status from authoritarian rule to then become a democracy within, let's say, a decade. No, things took much longer. They evolved over many decades, and in the case of the United States, the so-called poster child of Western democracy, over 150 years till its democracy, we the people, truly represented we, all the people. The same goes for many nations like the United Kingdom, who had to go through their own suffragette moments to be all-inclusive. So why does the West expect the Arab world to change so immediately? Is it possible? Or is it even fair? The West was granted time, yet the West doesn't grant the Arab world time. Arab societies have indeed progressed rapidly over the last 50 years, but even then, Arabs still deal with societal and behavioral elements that are still deeply entrenched into tradition as well as into their faith. Leaps and bounds have been achieved in the Arab world in terms of certain social reforms, but in general, most societies are still challenged by the priority of a community over that of an individuality. When we apply the system of representation of Western democracy through voting, where one individual means one vote, the Arab behavior begins to contradict such a system. Arabs remain a patriarchal society. In this case, it's the direction of the patriarch that would instruct the family towards who shall receive the votes of this group. This challenge is further compounded by the yet-to-be-overcome community loyalty that again reduces the say and voice of the individual, resulting in a block of votes representing the political inclinations and loyalties of tribes, clans, and other subgroups. Hence, a system of a right for the individual to vote and represent their own personal thoughts and beliefs is diminished. Intolerance within society based on ethnic, religious, and traditions is another limitation that Arabs have to contend with. Blind allegiances to religious leanings or societal hierarchies have yet to be distilled within amalgamated populations. These can be Sunni Shia, upper elite, lower class, and last but not least, Badawi or Hadari. And all these challenges tunnel into a yet-to-be-achieved understanding for Arabs, that the value of their person, their ideas, beliefs, and convictions reflected in their one vote is crucial. And it takes a long time to understand and have full belief that the one vote amounts to something even when one is of 10 million. And without such a conviction, any sort of rule by the people through representation achieved through a one person, one vote method will be heavily flawed. Okay, so if we as Arabs are not there just yet, what is the goal for Arabs in the interim? What version of governance does the Arab world want to see take shape? Well, if we distill Western democratic goals and rights for their people, it all comes down to the basics. And Arabs want nothing but the basics. Security and safety and a place to live in. Affordability of food, education for their children, health for their families, and justice for all, big or small. Freedom of assembly or speech, abuse of power, sexual reform, and other fundamentals of Western democracy can wait. Arabs also want to maintain their conservatism, have a set of moral and ethical codes that is reflective of their faith. This doesn't mean that such governance imposes a Sharia law system, but it can mean that the nations can be intrinsically conservative in their laws and legislations, respecting traditions and beliefs. Again, this point speaks of the same process that Western nations took in gradually establishing the rights of the majority prior to implementing the same for the whole population. Such is the right of the Arab world, to choose, as did many nations around the world, of what is lawful and what isn't for them. Capital punishment as an inhumane practice sees a huge chasm between Europe and the rest of the world, example of whom would be the United States. Other legislations that challenge this notion of an across-the-board democracy is the element of chewing gum in public. In Singapore, one could go to jail for up to 2 years for performing such an unbelievable act. So, Arabs have the right to find their own quote-unquote democratic space, not one succumbing to any Western pressures, nor one of a blinded acceptance of what the West is promoting in terms of factors that shape a method of governance for Arabs. The Arab world can independently reach that point on their own time. Some of the Arabs, the newer, fewer, and more fortunate ones in terms of national wealth, actually have achieved this method of governance, but others, those with the largest populations, have not. And those equate to over 68% of the Arab world. And for these nations, the number one factor is a foundation of safety and security, in identifying a technocratic leadership that is supported by a unified and neutral army to propel such nations from a position of instability and destruction to one of nation building and the satisfaction of basic human needs and rights. For the army to hold accountable the progress of such leadership, be it with success or failures. And most critically, for the army never to confront the people and suppress their voices. No good has ever come of that throughout the course of history. Beyond safety, security, and the stability of a nation, Housing, educational, and healthcare reforms must be at the forefront of this new nation-building exercise, followed by the rule of law and then the implementation of basic rights that govern the lay of the land. This would in turn introduce the opportunity for a new collective evolution of Arab behavior, political, economic, societal, and one of accountability. Mindsets that could develop over an extended period of time with a more natural and unforced progression that could eventually take a few decades. Now, most of you will say I'm being naive, or that all my thoughts are wishful thinking. A neutral military? A technocratic leadership that actually wants the development of their nations and to succeed in transforming them into nations having great foundations for growth? Where have they all been so far? Such a question is well understood, but at the same time, that's why attempting to realize the Western democratic ideal is even further remote. And to be fully honest, such issues of not having a neutral military or technocratic leadership in place don't truly represent the conundrum for the Arab world. The real challenge comes with the struggle between old traditions and new ideas. Some of the things Arabs want to retain within their socio-political behavior directly contradict modern governance systems and the development of nations. They prioritize particular communities over a nation. That is the real farce, because a nation is ultimately the larger and more encompassing community. And if these smaller communities are kept strong and powerful, be it by Western involvement or regional power players, then the possibility of the unity and prosperity of each Arab nation will never see the light.